Thanks. Morning, everybody. So yeah, I'm Bill Lincoln. I am the Director of Platform Engineering, part of our SRE team at Wayfair. This is Matt.
And I'm Matthew Coleman. I am an SRE tech lead working here in Europe under Bill.
So our talk today is kind of how we went on kind of the mission of globalizing our SRE team. So Wayfair was very much a Boston-based organization out of a single office, and about a year and a half, coming up on 2 years ago, we opened up a Berlin office. We're going to talk a little bit about what worked great, what didn't work at all, and the things that we've learned. So first, kind of a little bit of a snapshot about Wayfair, if you guys haven't heard of us. So we sell pretty much a zillion things for your home. We were founded in 2002. We went public in 2014. Our growth has been exponential over the last many years. In the last year alone, we doubled our market cap, coming just short of 6.9 billion right now. We regularly see more than 50% growth across all the metrics that we measure year over year, which definitely makes for some kind of interesting engineering challenges when your systems are growing 50, 60, 70% year over year. One of the interesting things, like when we do holiday planning, most retail organizations do holiday planning. They plan for a big jump, and then they settle back down to where they were for a while and work their way up. We plan for a big jump, and then we're back to that point by the end of Q1 the next year. So like we just kind of do these leaps up. We've grown from about 4,000 employees when I joined the company, just coming up on 2 years ago, to 8,000 employees in the time that I've been there. Engineering went from like 400 or so employees to almost 1,000 people in the just about 2 years I've been there, which also creates some interesting challenges. Niraj Shah, our CEO, at a recent all hands in the spring said, take a look around. 60% of the people in this room have been here less than a year, which makes for some pretty interesting challenges. The SRE team, we've currently got about 30 people globally within the team. We are expanding this to be 50 people. So yes, we are hiring, if you're wondering. We have an office, as I mentioned earlier, in Berlin, and our biggest office is in Boston. We also have an office here in Ireland over in Galway. We have about 5,000 production systems that we manage within our infrastructure that are used for business operations. Overall, we have over 10,000 systems, but about 5,000 of them are in scope and production. We push 100 plus changes per day to our production code base, and predominantly most of our systems are all open source based. So why did we decide to grow SRE in Europe at all? One was taking advantage of the European talent pool. Needless to say, the Boston market is fairly small. We're in downtown Boston and Back Bay. We compete with Facebook and Amazon and Google and all the others. There's a limited pool of talent there to draw from, and we've started to run into that. We're also significantly enhancing and growing our European business as a company. The business has recognized that there's just as much business availability in the European market as there is in the US market. So we've been investing very heavily over the last couple of years to try to ramp that business up. And offering kind of 24/7 monitoring. So we have a 24/7 NOC that is staffed out of both of our Boston office and our Berlin office, and there's a handoff that happens between them. And we have SRE in both locations. We have quite a few other software and engineering teams as well. Infrastructure is interesting because we all work on the same things, we focus on the same things, and predominantly it's there to provide 24/7 coverage and ongoing project progress 24/7. On the software side, a lot of the software teams are very specifically focused on European type problems. Shipping is different over here, payments are very different over here, there's globalization, language issues that they work on. So they work on kind of more specific regional stuff, where the stuff that we're working on is ultimately kind of the same. So how do you grow an international team? What kind of tools did we use to succeed? So first, let's talk about what didn't work. A lot of things didn't work. So any problems that you currently have within your team are going to be amplified and get a whole lot worse as soon as you kind of globalize. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a few, but Wayfair, I was always very surprised when I joined a couple years ago at how much of a walk-up culture we really had. There was so much that happened. Like before I was here, I worked for Pythian, and 100% of my team worked from home. I worked from home full time. It was as awesome as it sounds. But the whole company was built around people working remotely. When I got to Wayfair, like most everything that happened was like somebody walks over to somebody's desk, and then somebody else walks over to that desk, and then there's this huge discussion that happens, and some big decision is made. And everybody's like, yeah, that was awesome. That gets really hard when you have people thousands and thousands of miles away, 6 hours off in a different time zone, that wake up and are like, wait, what happened? Or worse yet, something breaks and they're like, what is this thing? I never even knew this thing existed. So, you know, communications problems, information sharing problems, those get amplified very, very quickly. So one of the big things we noticed was multiple teams tried to spin up teams in our Berlin office, and several of them failed pretty fantastically. And usually what caused them to fail was the Boston-based teams. Management for these teams was purely based in Boston. And we hired really smart, skilled, talented engineers out in Berlin, but the teams in Boston didn't really know what to do with them. So they would only give them stuff that they could package up. Like, hey, apply this software patch tonight. Like, it was very operational work, stuff that just could be delegated. Here's a script, this is what I want you to do this thing. So what happened is we had highly skilled engineers that were basically being given busy work for all intents and purposes. And it didn't work very well. We couldn't retain those engineers. And it caused, you know, lots of inter-team issues too. Work was very boring. So in balancing handing over, like, this is what I want you to do, don't ask questions, just do what we told you to do, versus actually empowering a team to take ownership in the infrastructure and make decisions and truly be part of the team. Like, they always felt very separate. They always felt like they weren't really part of the team. They were just there to do work between the hours of 3 a.m. and 9 a.m. Eastern time. So that didn't work very well. We also had some interesting things that happened with management. Our recruiting teams, still to this day, are very separate entities. The European recruiting team and the United States recruiting team are managed by different groups, and sometimes we find ourselves translating between them, because at the end of the day, like, a lot of times I don't necessarily care where I hire an SRE. I don't care if they're in Berlin, I don't care if they're in Boston. Like, I need a person that has this skill set, let's go find them. And they didn't really work that way, so working with them to kind of figure that out was a big thing. And we have a very complicated technology stack that has grown ridiculously fast. And shockingly, it's not all that well documented. So there's lots of domain knowledge there, right? And transitioning that information over to a team that's across the seas that's mostly new people was really, really challenging. One of the things that made us successful, and Matt will talk about this in his section a bit more, is Matt is actually from Boston, and we shipped him over to Berlin 2 years ago, and he's done a 2-year tour there that was, I think, pretty much the main reason that SRE was successful when a lot of the other teams were not, or had troubles being successful in Berlin, is because Matt had been with the company for just coming up on 4 years, I think, and knew where all the bodies were buried, knew all the domain information, like, could survive without the documentation, and that was very, very helpful. The other thing, this is something I noticed. I spent 2 weeks in Berlin back in December, making people work weird hours. So when most of the company is in Boston and you're 6 hours off in Berlin, like, Boston doesn't wake up until like afternoon your time, right? It's really bizarre. So what happens is, and one of my big fears for Matt, which is still a problem, is that, like, they're gonna work till 10, 11 o'clock at night, because that's when all the people that they need to talk to are around, and trying to find a way to manage that so people aren't working basically double shifts. Inefficient communications technology was a huge challenge. Being able to have tools to allow collaboration We've been through many different tools. Some of them were miserable. Some of them work pretty well. Today we use a lot of Slack and Google collaboration suites and stuff like that. Trying to preserve that kind of walk-up culture, but also finding a way to let the remote people participate in that. So we came up with a couple ideas around that. There might be significant cultural differences, especially from places that are not the US, right? We had an interesting exchange early on where our NOC was trying to schedule some work after hours. It was like 4 o'clock Eastern time, and they needed to get somebody from Berlin to do something when they came in at 3 a.m. Eastern time. So they emailed this person, and the person never responded, and the work didn't get done. So the next day, the NOC contacted the person. They were like, hey, didn't you get that email? And he's like, well, I got it this morning when I came in. He's like, well, you didn't see it last night? No. Well, don't you have your email on your phone? Why would I have my email on my phone? Like, that's weird. In the US, it's like, we all have our email on our phone. Maybe we're the ones doing it wrong, I think. But, so like some very interesting cultural differences. And taking that culture in is kind of one of the things that's important too. So I'm gonna hand over to Matt. He has a different perspective because he was the one over there. So one of the things we wanted to do was like give this talk from 2 different perspectives. So I was in Boston pretty much for the last 2 years, and he was over in Berlin, so.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot, Bill. We're gonna use my phone now. Yeah, all right. So thank you guys for suffering through all that sort of dramatic talk. I promise it does get better. It's a happier story in the end. Particularly for SRE. And I can't stress enough that we did see infrastructure teams try to onboard to remote sites, to European sites, and they literally failed. And it was sad to see, and they'll be sort of recovering that over the next year or the next 2 years or something like that. At SRE, I am proud to say, made it through the fire. As unique a team as SRE tends to be in the infrastructure scope, I'm kind of really proud of that work that I helped in and that my colleagues here in Europe and in Boston sort of participated in making successful. Because, you know, on top of all the challenges that internationalization gives you, the challenges of just running a successful SRE team, like, you know, underneath that are hard enough as it is. So I'm really excited to see where the team goes and to share with you guys kind of what happened. So this one might be kind of obvious to say, which is that ownership is really important to an SRE team, and particularly to an SRE international team. That's not a new message, right? You want the SRE teams, or really teams in general in infrastructure and software, to be able to own things so that they can feel some sense of ownership and, you know, develop their team culture around their platforms or their projects or things like this. But there's particular strategies around how you would do it with a remote office that I think are important to point out. Neither can you not give any ownership to an SRE team that you're starting in a remote space, nor can you give them ownership of something and sort of say, all right, you own it, now go do it, and don't talk to them, you know, and don't check in with them, and don't make sure that they're, you know, discovering the things that they need to discover and have all the tools that they need to succeed. So you have to be pretty strategic, like I said, about what sort of things you give them to own in the beginning. And usually it's things that you can isolate to a specific place, which can kind of be a challenge when you're working on homogeneous infrastructure. But you want it to be projects, at least in the beginning, that they can work on basically with themselves to some degree of success. They don't usually need to heavily rely on somebody in the established location. I'm trying to avoid words like Boston and Berlin because hopefully this strategies like kind of apply no matter where you want to expand. Yeah, and then eventually you start moving to projects where you really have to coordinate between the 2 locations or the 3 locations or whatever after you kind of have some initial successes. And after your new location is sort of chugging along with this piece of the stack that they're really taking hold of. That last quote is something that I like to say to my fellow team members all the time, and it's something that I feel like I want to encourage with them constantly, and that I have to, is that you're a site reliability member at Wayfair, full-fledged. If you see something that's wrong, you have the power to go in and fix it. One thing that it's really important to say on the complexity side is don't shy away from it. If you're trying to explain a complex piece of technology or a technology that's maybe not so homogeneous to your remote workers, be completely honest about why it is that way. Maybe it's that way because nobody's taken the time to fix it. Maybe it's that way because of reasons. It's really easy to dismiss those types of things and just say, oh, no, you just need to fix it because this is different and that's all. Take the time to explain why it's different, and that really helps people. And like the message that we said before, any problem sort of explodes. If you have a stack that has a lot of technical debt that your SRE has to deal with, a lot of toil, right, to Google's terminology, it's going to compound in cost when you try to make your remote location deal with it as well. So we make the argument that once you start opening up your infrastructure to remote teams, it's a lot more important to fix those technical debt problems. Establishing communication models, if you haven't started to do that for remote teams or for your teams in general, it's important to do that, and I give some examples up here. Some of the things that we do here at Wayfair are RFC documents or design documents before we go into any big projects, and we sort of share those amongst the team and have everybody sort of collaborate on them, and that's a well-defined way to document the work that we're doing. Maintenance events, like I write that. Video conferencing etiquette, really establishing the guidelines around, when you're doing remote meetings, what is acceptable? Is it acceptable for somebody to be eating a can of Pringles during the meeting? Probably not, because, Google Video, as good as it is, hasn't figured out how to mute out the Pringle crunching sound yet.
And it's louder than people that are talking.
Yeah, and it's louder than people realize. So you literally, we have a document in our knowledge base now that's like how to have good video chat etiquette, and it works wonders. You move away from the ticketing system and the email system. Real-time communication is really important for remote teams. You can't get stuck in a cycle where remote teams are just sending emails back and forth to each other if they're 6 hours apart. It doesn't work. In general, expectations around documentation. People have to start writing down things more often, making sure they're doing a due diligence and sharing them. I'll talk a little bit about this since Bill kind of mentioned it, but one of the biggest successful things that we did was bringing over a person who from the already established business to the office. And it wasn't a manager position, it was a technical lead position that we brought over. And so I became that person, and I actually sat alongside my European colleagues, working on problems alongside them, and being a direct line of support for them when they had a question. I could also act as sort of a proxy for requests coming in from the Boston side. If they needed to interact with the European colleagues, they could talk to me first, and then I could sort of transmit the message. Occasionally that model, goes away as sort of your European colleagues, remote colleagues establish themselves. But in the beginning, it was critical and super helpful, and I would really consider doing it if you are considering doing this. Develop the culture of time zone appreciation. Encourage your colleagues to not wait on other people, and not wait on other people in the sense that they should just go out and do things, but find ways to communicate so that people don't have to wait on each other. Respect those time overlaps, prefer real-time communication again. Sometimes strange hours have to happen. Like sometimes I have to shift myself to more of a Boston timeline in order to go to a late meeting or something like that, but I know that the business will compensate me by letting me come in late or something like that. Establish your work from home policy, because your remote work policy is really your work from home policy. It shouldn't matter where you're working, just as long as the communication models are there and everything's sort of running the way it should and nobody's getting frustrated. So this is sort of a list of takeaways that I'd say. There's lots of culture development that has to happen. Ownership is important. Aggressively go after people getting stuck, whether that's communication issues or not understanding the technology or trying too hard to figure out things themselves when maybe just a little bit of coordination with the other side is helpful. Problems are going to happen, and you're going to have to watch out for those. Consider the seating. It really, really worked for us. We're going to continue to grow up Europe, and we're excited about that. We are hiring, so if please come talk to us about what Wayfair does and what kind of things we work on, because we'd love to have that chat with you and maybe consider bringing you in for interviews. You know, we want to be top tier SRE and bring Wayfair infrastructure to a place that it's really great to work on. Yeah. So Bill really wanted our logo in here, so I put this slide together. Also, I'd like to thank our mascot, Macho Man Randy Savage. He helps us in all things that we do.
He shows up in an alarming number of presentations. I don't know why.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, maybe I'll let Bill take over on the careers thing.
Yeah. So, you know, we're working on building diverse teams in multiple places. In fact, I had a chat this morning about hiring SREs here in Ireland. We do have an office over in Galway, and I was told that that is something that we could absolutely do, which I got really excited about because it was the first time we had that conversation. So feel free to reach out to us. We've got about 10 minutes left, so if anybody kind of has questions, if you're trying to do this within your organization or thinking about doing it within your organization and you have kind of questions for us about what worked, what didn't, come on up, I think, to the microphone over there and we'd be happy to answer them for you.